Hi everyone, I'm Freddie and I love reading, and I am particularly a sucker for a good fantasy series. But the thing is, there are so many series that I want to read. New ones keep coming out, and it's hard to keep up with all of the series I want to read. But there are always a book or a series on the shelf just staring at me from behind, going, "What about us? You said you wanted to read us? When are you going to get to that? Have you forgotten all about us?" At least that's what I imagine they sound like. Yeah. In this video, I'm going to go over some completed series where I haven't read a single book, but I really want to get to them, get started on them in the near future. So let's just get right into it. First, I have a bit of an honorable mention because I have started this series. I'm not done with the first one yet, and there might be a reading vlog out about it, or it might be coming out very soon, depending on when I finish it. So that would be The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. Now, this is a 14-book series with a prequel, I believe, where the last books in the series were written by Brandon Sanderson because Robert Jordan sadly passed away. And this is a very beloved series. I've heard great things. I have a friend who loves it. It's a classic epic fantasy series that I've wanted to read for a really long time, but I have finally started it. I am 3/4 of the way through the first book at this moment. So it doesn't really fit this video, but I figured I would just mention it in case anyone in the comments went, "What about Wheel of Time?" It's coming. I'm working on it. Don't you worry. So first up, we'll go through the ones that are on my 2025 TBR, or at least the first book in the series is, because those are obviously books that I want to read in the near future. I've just already also mentioned them in a different video, but we'll still go through them here. First, we have The Expanse by James S.A. Corey, which is the pen name for the writer duo of Daniel Abraham and Ty Frank, who wrote this series together. This is an adult space opera series made up of 9 books and 9 novellas, and it actually won the Hugo Award for Best Series in 2020, I believe. And there's also a TV show adaptation with 6 seasons made of this. It's definitely not an obscure series by any means. It's quite well known, and I've owned the first one for several years by now, and I haven't read it yet. Just to give a short idea of what it's about, this is, as I mentioned, a space opera set in a future where the solar system has been colonized and people are living on different moons and planets and space stations. We're following a cast of characters in different areas of the solar system. And I honestly don't know much more about the plot, but I don't mind that. I like going into a series relatively blind, so that's completely fine by me. As I mentioned, I own the first book, Leviathan Wakes, already, so I really just need to get to it. I've heard great things about this series. It's now completed. I don't gravitate that much towards sci-fi as compared to fantasy, but I feel like space opera should be just my thing, right? Because it's kind of a mix of the things I love in epic fantasy in space, and that sounds interesting. So I'm looking forward to reading this. My elbow. Sometimes I'm amazed that I have never broken a bone in my life. I don't know how, but moving on to another one that's also on my 2025 TBR, we have The Faithful and the Fallen by John Gwynne. This is a 4-book adult high fantasy series which takes place in what's called the Banished Lands, which were once ravaged by wars between humans and giants, but those days are long past. We follow Corbin, who wants to learn how to fight with a sword. That's basically all I know about him. And it seems that these wars that should be far in the past might be returning. So things are stirring in the Banished Lands. Once again, I don't know much else about the series. I've heard good things. I've heard just as good things about his newer series, which I also want to read, but I do want to start with his debut series, and I've heard great things about this. And I've owned this for an embarrassing amount of time. I think I've owned this for like 10 years, which is a tiny bit embarrassing, and I've just never gotten around to reading it. So I'm putting it on my priority in the hopes that I will get that last little push to actually read it now. And I just get this feel that it's, classic high fantasy, politics, battles, sword fighting, and I love that. Why have I not read this before? Why? I can't answer that. That's the second time I've hit my elbow against my little table here, and again, how am I still alive? I honestly can't say. Now for the last of the series that are also on my 2025 TBR, we have Shades of Magic by V.E. Schwab. Now this, when I first discovered booktube and started watching booktube content, this was all the rage. Everyone was reading it. I don't remember if the third one had just come out and finished the trilogy, or if it was just very popular, but everyone was talking about it. So I bought book 1 and 2, and then I just never read it. I've read other works by by V. Schwab and enjoyed those. So why have I not read this? This, as far as I can see, is described as a young adult. I thought it was adult, but maybe it's one of those books where you can debate where it falls. I'm not sure what it's marketed as though. But this is a fantasy trilogy which takes place in a London very similar to our London, except that there are 4 parallel Londons: red, grey, white, and black. And in this we follow Kel, who has the rare ability to travel between these different Londons, and he uses this ability both as an ambassador but also as a smuggler, I believe. That sounds interesting. So I need to get to this, or I need to own up to never getting around to reading it and giving it to a new home, because I've owned the first 2 for so long now, and I just need to read them. So next we're getting to some series that I own on my definitely fully charged Kindle that I just kind of forget that I own because it's on my Kindle, so I can't see them. I have to go into the library. My ADHD memory is not good without the visuals. So now I'm putting it out into the universe and hoping that that will help me remember that I own these series. First off, we have the Winnowing Flame trilogy by Jen Williams. This is an adult high fantasy series where there's this people kind of very elvish like that used to be very magnificent and have a beautiful kingdom, but a plague struck them down, and we have Tormalin, who's not content with sitting around waiting to die, and he would rather be out exploring the human world and seeing all the women and drinking all the booze, as well as Lady Vincenza, I'm not sure, nickname Vintage, much easier for me to say, who is an eccentric researcher and explorer who offers him employment, and together they find an escaped witch who has a habit of setting things on fire. That's like a very brief, I think it's one of those books where the less you know, maybe the better. I've heard that said several times about the series, that it's good to go in kind of unknowing. And I actually did start this series last year, and I got about a third of the way through. You know how it is. Sometimes life happens, things get busy. I forgot basically that I was reading it, so it was kind of a soft DNF where I didn't consciously stop reading it. I was just doing a bunch of things. I was living in Finland for a couple of months, and things got hectic. So I kind of just forgot that I was reading it. I stopped, and now I'm at the point where I feel like I need to start over to remember everything, because otherwise I'd probably miss things. Because I was enjoying what I was reading. It was very interesting. It was very weird, which is fun. But yeah, I need to go back to the beginning to really get what I'm reading. And the thing is, I have the whole trilogy on my Kindle, so I have no excuses. I just need to remember to read it. So if I forget, you can tell me to do it, and we'll see if that works. Next up, we have a very beloved trilogy that I've also been wanting to read for a while, and that would be the Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee. The first book being Jade City, which is set in kind of a modern fantasy world, but there's Jade, which is a rare gem that gives people superhuman powers. And we follow a family, and I'm unsure, I think it's a crime family, and everything they're doing, like politically and crime-wise, I'm not sure, but I've heard it compared to The Godfather, so that's why I'm thinking that direction. So this is a powerful family, and we're kind of seeing their machinations and all the trials and tribulations they go through. So I've heard that this is a very compelling, very political trilogy where it's not like super action-packed, super battle-heavy or anything, but more intrigue that's gonna suck the reader right in. And the fact that we're following a family, and I assume we're probably gonna get POVs from different members of the family, I think that sounds very interesting. And I've heard several people call it their favorite fantasy trilogy ever, so that's very high praise, and I can't wait to see where I fall in this. And the stupid thing is, oh, for heaven's sake, one! She had her claws out in my leg. I don't mind when she comes to cuddle, but could she do it without claws? What was I saying? Right. The stupid thing is, this is another one where I own all 3 on my Kindle. I've owned them for a while now. I might have gotten them on sale or just decided to buy them at some point and then forgotten all about them. So now, putting it out into the universe, need to read these, must remember to read them. Now for this last Kindle related one, I only own the first one on my Kindle, and that is Powder Mage Trilogy by Brian McKellen. This is an adult flintlock fantasy following a successful coup d'etat where the monarchy has been overthrown, and now we're following kind of the consequences of that and following some of the instigators of this coup d'etat, which sounds very interesting. And of course we have royalists who want to go back to the way things were. There's war brewing with neighbors who see a weakness, and much more. So this sounds very interesting, very tense, lots of political intrigue. I do like that in my fantasy series. I think it's gonna potentially also be very interesting to follow the aftermath of a coup d'etat. I feel like it's not uncommon to see both the build up to a coup d'etat and then whatever happens, whether it's successful or not, then to see the aftermath. But from what I understand with this, it's basically starting like the coup d'etat's done. Now we're just seeing the aftermath. So I think that sounds super interesting as well. And as far as I know, I think there's a follow-up series that follows the trilogy. I don't know if it's another trilogy, but for now we're just starting with one, and then if I enjoy this one, we can move on to the follow-up series as well. We have 3 series left on my list, and these I don't own in any form. I don't own on my Kindle, I don't own any of them physically, and I don't own them on audiobook either. So these I just want to read. I've heard great things, but I need to either get them from the library or buy them before I can actually read them. The first one being the Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu. The first book being The Grace of Kings. This is a 4-book fantasy series where we follow a charming bandit as well as the son of a deposed duke who form an unlikely team in an uprising against the emperor. That sounds pretty interesting. And this takes place in an Asian-inspired setting with airships and shape-shifting gods, but it's also highly influenced by historical events. Now, this is another one I don't know much more about the plot. I've heard great things. I've heard some mixed things on the first one, but the series as a whole, I feel I hear very good things about, so I really want to read it. Next up, we have the first trilogy in a larger series that I honestly can't really believe I haven't read any of yet, because I've heard about it for years and years and I've been interested for years, but I haven't gotten around to it yet. And that would be the First Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. So as I mentioned, this is a trilogy, and then there's 3 standalones in the middle and another trilogy, which are all part of the same series. And this is a grim, dark fantasy set in a world at war, where the world is also on the brink of an industrial revolution. We follow the barbarian Logan, the nobleman Jasal, the inquisitor Glodka, and the wizard Bias. I don't know much else. I've just heard a lot about very compelling, very morally gray characters that you can't help but love, even though they do horrible things. And I've heard that the books only get better throughout. I think some people's favorites are some of the standalone books, but as far as I know, it is recommended to read them in this order in order to get all of the details. And this is a very highly beloved series, so I really want to read it, but I'm also a little bit scared. It's been a while since I've read like proper grim dark fantasy, and I feel like my emotions are not prepared. But I mean, that's not going to change just by waiting any longer, so might as well just get them shattered early on. Why not? I think it's hurting where she scratched me. Now, last on this list, but certainly not least, we have a humongous fantasy series that intimidates the crap out of me. And I would say with good reason. And I am, of course, talking about Malazan Book of the Fallen by Steven Erikson. This is like the white whale of fantasy, I feel. I really want to give it a shot. This is a 10-book high fantasy series set over thousands of years, multiple continents, hundreds of POV characters, and it's just all around a massive series. As far as I understand, the first 5 books are a bit more self-contained, but then everything kind of starts coming together in the later half. And this is also a story that's based on what was originally a tabletop role-playing game, I believe. And there are books written by Ian Cameron Esselmont, which also take place in this universe, and as far as I know, are also canon. But I'm gonna have to start in one spot, and I'm intimidated enough just by the core 10 books. So now it's not without reason that I'm intimidated, other than it being a humongous series, but I've also heard very mixed things. There are people who swear by this series. It's the pinnacle of fantasy for them and they love it. But then there's also people who read the first couple of books and could not get into it at all. And I'm kind of worried that I'll fall more in the second camp, because some of the critiques that I've heard about the series are things where I worry that I would also not love that. So I'm a bit worried about that, because it's a series that I want to read the entire thing and I want to love it, but can't always control that. I generally bond very tightly to characters. There's a reason why Realm of the Elderlings is my favorite, because Fitz and the Fool are just, I love them so much, and Robin Hobb destroys me emotionally. So the fact that Malazan Book of the Fallen is split over so many different POV characters, so some of these POVs you'll only see once or twice or something, at least as far as I know, so you won't really get that deep of a connection to the singular POV characters. But I've heard that you'll see POVs from within the same group, so you're seeing different sides of the same story, which I also think sounds super fascinating. I have also heard that it's rough getting into the first one, because you're kind of just plopped right into the story. Like there's no help. You're just figuring out as you go along, which again, that sounds interesting, but I don't know if I'll really jive with that. I have a habit of forgetting details because I have ADHD and my brain is like, no, that's not important. But do you remember that number that we heard randomly 3 years ago? Yeah, that's important. That's locked in. And that's just very annoying when reading fantasy series because I do feel like I miss things. I miss important foreshadowing things. And I feel like that will really, really be obvious in this one. But I want to give it a try and we'll see how it goes. So that was the 9 completed series that I want to get to in the near future. Tell me in the comments if you've read any of these and you would really recommend them, or if you have an idea of where to start. So give me your best sales pitch if you want to, and maybe that will influence where I start. But I look forward to seeing how many I get to in the near future. Fingers crossed I get to all of them. That would be lovely. I don't think it's realistic, but it would be lovely. Either way, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you next time. Bye!